Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. So today's video, we're going to be looking at a question or a challenge that was actually given to me by one of my long-term, audience members, and they told me to go ahead and work on doing solo heroic control points and gave me a series of factions to do. Now, I have to confess, with the time that I have, I was only able to do 3 of them, and I did 2 of them for the cleaners because supposedly they're the pain, and I did 1 for the hyenas. Now, I know many people will say, but outcasts are also a pain, but we'll put that for another video. I'll probably go in there and do a solo outcast one just to kind of check off the list. But what's really important was because the cleaners ones that I did 1 in New York and 1 in DC. So that would have a little variance and see what the issues may be that actually challenge solo play. And the very first thing that I noticed in this new patch, I haven't done a control point in this Title Update 8 or Warlords of New York solo, but the old patches, yes, all that was, it was a different game back then. But since Warlord has come out, I've just been farming heavily on 2 different accounts. So I've prioritized working with groups because I've just felt it's better to farm that way. People can drop things that they may not need for you. But guess what I figured out once I went to do this thing solo? I found out that level 4 control points as a solo player is actually very easy. And I'm not saying this to brag, or I'm not saying this to, downplay the difficulty. I'm just saying that compared to the level 4 control points, heroic, solo is actually much scaled, in my opinion. That's what I found out. I was quite surprised. Now, I've known also that the 3-man control points are also quite easier than the 4-man, and the 2-man I haven't necessarily messed with. It's also very easy. And what's really interesting is this actually got me to start thinking, I wonder what the challenges are for a lot of solo players, and I had to quickly note them down because these challenges have basically driven a lot of people into frustration. And the heroic open world is where I think the problem is for many people. Now, this is an intentional design, I think, to increase the level of difficulty for players, because not only are you going to have just the control point enemy NPCs to deal with, enemy NPCs from different activities are going to spawn around you. And I think this is done to increase the level of difficulty, like I said. Now, what that means is, as a solo player, you'll probably have to go around checking out the area of your control point and maybe even clearing it out before you actually get in. I did that because I didn't want a bunch of NPCs just to roll up on me, because I know from 4-man groups that happens, but because we're 4-man groups, we usually can take on them. But as a solo player, I was very aware that this is going to happen, and so I just took my time. If there was like a speaker thing going on, a hijack speaker thing, I'll take my time and knock out the enemy NPCs, and then I don't activate it, because if you don't activate it, they don't spawn again. So good. In one case, there was a territory control in that area. It just spawned out of nowhere. I mean, I literally went to the base of operations and came back, and an elite territory control was their level, heroic open world. So I just kind of took my time and I just did it, and then I went to do my control point, and that was fine. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is fine and dandy. No, there are systems within the game that I think will be very helpful for gameplay as a whole. And I've proposed this system in multiple videos, and I'm going to continue to propose it because I think right now it's starting to catch, a little bit of momentum. A lot of people have been really on my case because I'm talking positive about the Division 2, and people want me to talk negative. They want me to just kind of hammer down and be like mean, but I'm not doing that. I want to be constructive in my thinking because it's, like I said before, it's easy to be negative, but when it's time to propose solutions to the problem, that's where the difficulty is. So here's the problem, and here's my proposed solution. Armor in the Division 2 is in a messy place right now. It is actually not well done. It is the biggest deficiency in the game. If somebody runs 1 million armor and is getting shredded by enemy NPCs very fast, then that's nonsense. It's a whole different case if somebody was running all yellows or all reds and they were getting shredded. That's the problem. There is no reason for you as a DPS player to touch any blues. Why? You don't need it. It's not going to do anything for you. Or as a skill player, for you to even bother with any blues, except you're trying to build a tank and you're trying to do some kind of a weird hybrid build. And even for you as a tank player, there is almost no reason for you to even bother about running blues. Now, I get it. If you're using the tardigrade armor and you want to be giving 80% of your huge 1 point something million armor to your team, then sure. But the armor doesn't really do much for them. It just kind of gives them like a blue bar that shows up like, oh, I didn't die. That's basically what you're giving them. It's like unbreakable or some kind of a quick lifeline for them to be able to make their way into cover. And so the proposed solution that I have basically been thinking about and has been reinforced by other people I've been talking to on Discord here on YouTube is that every single armor piece needs to be able to mitigate higher damage than it's already doing right now. Or the base armor that every agent has, I think it's about 666,000 armor. If you run all reds right now and you're only running the armor that comes with your gear set, that's where you see your base armor. So your mask, holster, glove, backpack, knee pads, and chest piece all have an armor value that I think comes out to be 666,000 or so. That number might need to be increased. So if they do a patch or something, they can just take all the armor pieces and increase their factor by maybe 15, 20, 30%. That might help solve some of the issues because that will be mitigating a little bit more damage. And then the armor that you roll on your gear, 170,000 armor, that armor needs to be interacting with damage coming in, bullet damage or melee damage, at a different divisive factor. Somebody said you use the log factor to do something like that in math or in programming. That's, I think, the way that this is going to be solved, so that if a solo player is building and they wear all reds, then they know that they're living on the edge. That's basically my thing. Or if they say, okay, I'm going to sacrifice 2 different damage factors, 30% damage, I'm going to sacrifice that from my weapon and run 240,000 armor, but I know that 240,000 armor is going to be good for me, then I think I can make that trade. If not, then the armor system continues to remain broken and the game makes no sense when it comes to the difficulty. Because even if the armor feels better, it will still break when the enemy NPCs are shooting. It just will not break as fast, and the agent can adjust and go into cover. Not the one where you see an enemy NPC standing in front of you and you know you're definitely gone. That's not the way the game should play, in my opinion. Now, there also is another thing that has to be said about difficulty. Difficulty has to be in this game. Everyone can beat Legendary, but not everyone right now or today will be able to do it with just anything, just doing it based on just kind of a passive way. There is a power creep that you can actually take to adjust your gameplay, learn the mechanics, and eventually get to the point where you're slapping enemies left and right on solo heroic. For some people, it took 2 days. For me, it took about 2 months. And for some people, it'll probably take about 6 months. There is no shame in your own player capabilities. It's based on the time you're able to invest in the game. And I'm telling you, for me, that would have probably taken about 4 months if we didn't have all the situations that grounded some of us, away from having to go out of the house or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. And so these are some of the struggles that we see, because the solo heroic, even though it is much more difficult regarding a lot of enemy NPCs, I've seen people equate that to saying, well, that means it's harder than the heroic missions. I don't think so. Enemies are scaled with the same health at the same world level, and heroic has a higher risk, aspect, and the rewards are not even that great. So I think they actually go neck and neck in difficulty, because in a heroic mission, permadeath hits you. That's it. Just imagine playing Manning National Zoo on heroic against the invaded Black Tusk and a team of 4, and somehow in the middle of that mission you wipe. That's the end. In a control point, even if you have a bunch of enemy NPCs keep showing up, you can keep respawning and going back there. So regarding difficulty, both of them go neck and neck in my opinion. And so what I've seen is there is something to be said about your own capability as a player and your knowledge of the game. If you're going to go fight the cleaners, you have to go with a specific, mind frame. And what's even crazy is, and I know people will say, but your build is min-maxed. I did not use the M1A for any of these control points. I didn't use any of those red builds. I went to the ones in DC, the 2 I did in DC, I went with my shield build. And then the one I did in New York, I went with the tip of the spare build. The build is wonky and weird because you have to be playing and, swapping your signature weapons. But with my survivalist, specialization, I was golden. And I really enjoyed the challenge, and it really taught me a lot about how this game's mechanics do work and how solo players can continue to counter these mechanics if you want to do it. The Division solo mechanics are challenging. I do agree. Why the developers have decided to make it very challenging, I don't know. That's something somebody would have to ask them. But the thing needs to be actually put here in a video like this, that not everybody will be able to complete the hardest difficulty, not because they can't, but just because the time of investment, they probably will not be willing to put it in. And that's also fine. I think most players have forgotten that if you can't play at a difficulty level, you can just adjust your difficulty level to what suits you. And I think it's a matter of pride. Everybody wants to say, yeah, I can play on heroic. Guys and girls, I was playing on normal when the patch came out. I didn't even care. They're like, oh, some people will even say your open world is on normal. Like literally, I will matchmake for a mission and I see people insult me in the chat box saying, you left your open world on normal? And I will say, you're James Bond. I will respond back because I was not waiting for anybody to come and insult me because I was playing at a difficulty level that was comfortable for me. And so I started to just creep up. I just went from normal and I think I went straight to challenging. And then eventually now my open world stays on heroic. I don't bother changing it anymore. But that took me 2 months. For you, that may have taken 20 minutes. For some, it may have taken 6 months, or it will take 6 months. But that's the power progression that actually comes with everything. But armor needs to be addressed, at least to help players understand why they have that stat in the game. Now, if anybody's expecting to wear all red builds and just run around and run and gun in the Division game, the game will die. I know that the game's gonna die because we were actually there in patch 7, title update 7, title update 6. Everybody could run and gun. You could stack up all this awesome stuff on your gear. You were basically invincible, but the game died very fast, very, very fast. Instead of having the game feel like it is now, where armor makes no sense, if they put the armor systems and work it, the game's going to be very logical in the way that it works. Yes, I agree. Right now, the enemy damage has no logic behind it. It's just an enemy damage just to scale difficulty to some kind. It's an artificial scaling that makes no sense. Doesn't give the player a way to mitigate it. And then at the highest level difficulties, I've seen some comments of people saying, well, they scale the enemies really high, but our damage and all remains the same. I think at that point, skill is where it separates everything. As crazy as it sounds, or as inconvenient as it is to say, I think when you get to the legendary and when you get to the heroic side-ish, I think skill is now the defining factor, because you can have a maxed out build and still not be able to, solo or play or beat some missions. But then when you get to legendary, then I think those same builds can work, but now skill, knowledge of the game, and your ability as a player to adapt and adopt, ways to counter the systems is now what separates everything. These are my opinions, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Let me hear the conversation go on. Moses, you asked me to do this, so here's my assignment submitted. It's left up to you to grade. Peace.